let's get to why we're all here tonight. Amy Jo Kim. I've got to know her well over the years, become a friend. She is a game design expert who kind of, the way I describe it, we actually met in the Lean Startup universe. So she was a game design expert who kind of got into Lean Startup. I was a product management person who got into Lean Startup. And there's definitely overlap with product management and design in the work that she does, I can tell. So she's not just like a gamer. You're like, it's not just game design. A lot of the stuff applies. She did work on amazing games, Rock Band, The Sims, and Netflix, also Ultima Online. She's worked on a lot of great games. She has a PhD in Behavioral Neuroscience. She wrote this great book, Game Thinking, which 25 of you got copies of, digital copies of. She teaches master classes and workshops. That's her website, amyjokim.com and gamethinking.com. amyjokim.com and gamethinking.io. I don't know what you're laughing at. And I'm really excited. I'm so excited because as I was talking with Amy Jo about topics, I saw this video she put together with someone about how this technique works, and it really works. And so I was so excited. So she's going to be talking to us about how you can use GenAI Powered Storyboards to test your product ideas 10 times faster. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Amy Jo.
Thank you. It is so great to see you guys. Thank you for coming out. Isn't it great to be together? Yay! It's amazing. Thank you all on Zoom too. I'm really excited you're here. We do almost all our work remotely. We have clients all over the world. Our workshops and masterclasses bring people together from every continent. And this is going to be a fairly short talk because I really want to hear from you. So while I'm speaking, I want you to be thinking about how this connects with what you already know, what you've already done, and all the questions you have, because that's the part that I get excited about. So a little bit about me, if you're not familiar. I come from a very eclectic background. How many of you have a bit of an eclectic background? Anybody else? There's a lot of people in tech with different kinds of backgrounds. But my professional life has been being a game designer, a startup coach, which I do now, an entrepreneur myself, including venture-funded company that we had an exit, and an author. I wrote Game Thinking, and before that, Community Building on the Web, which many people still use because the examples are out of date, but the principles are timeless. And if you're not familiar with game thinking, absolutely, buy my book. It's a great intro, but we just put together a short video series of 3 to 4 minute videos explaining the basics. So write this URL down, gamethinking.io/PMF/all. You'll thank me later. Maybe somebody could type that into the Zoom. That'd be great. But that's a really great intro that it'll take you like a half hour at most, and you'll learn the basics for free. So my career has really been about multiplayer experiences and high retention experiences. That's my wheelhouse. That's where I've focused. And I've worked on a number of things, including what you see here, tonal. Any tonal users? Yeah. Netflix, Happify, Covet Fashion. Any girls, my fellow Covet Fashioners? Maybe The Sims. Anybody, any Sims fan? Yeah. One of my very all-time favorites. And what you're going to learn today is something that I learned and I brought to these projects. And I now teach and work with my clients. So let's talk prototypes. How many of you have ever used prototypes in your work? Right? But what kind of prototypes? Let's talk. Okay, well, what about the prototype has to do with what you're testing? Simple as that. And if you're testing your marketing message, how do we do that? Well, we have our fake landing page. How many have ever built a fake landing page? Yes, the many, the proud. There's a beta, and that evolves into a beta landing page. Maybe you've got more filtering, and eventually a launch landing page. That's your marketing message. There's other ways to test it, but that's very common. What I want you to notice is that you're not testing your product at all, not even a little, with that fake landing page. You're just testing your marketing message and how it resonates, which is fine, but it's limited. People fool themselves into thinking they've tested more than they have with the fake landing page, me included. Now let's talk about testing your end-to-end experience, like your concept. What do we want to deliver to people over time? As a game designer, this has been my wheelhouse. This is what I've mapped out and worked on. We do year in the life documents, things like that. How do you do that? Well, has anybody ever done a Wizard of Oz service prototype? Yeah, right? That's a way you sort of spit and baling wire it together and the humans act in the loop. What will be automated? That's a Wizard of Oz prototype. Love those, use those, much better than shipping. But even before that, there's something called concept storyboards I'm going to tell you about today. It's not just AI storyboards, it's a certain structure. This will let you test your end-to-end product experience before you've coded or designed any UX. And the value of that we'll get into in a moment. But as product managers, this will save you a lot of money and time. So now let's talk about testing your UX. I was a UX designer for many years, love UX. So you can do paper prototypes of some sort. We do a lot of that in gaming. And you can also do UX mock-ups, and you can show people Figma walkthroughs. These are all ways to test your UX. How many people have tested with one of those methods, right? We all know these. Those are great. And then there's also the product itself. You know, what can you test if you're building, well, an MVP or a rough alpha build, or we call it a vertical slice in gaming. These are the earliest things you can build and test. And a lot of people, especially in startup land, say, well, you just have to ship something in order to learn. That's how you learn, you ship. There's a lot faster and cheaper ways to learn. It depends on what you're doing. But here's what I want you to notice. Oh, that should be, okay, let's fix it in real time. That got, somehow it got moved. Let's put it back down. Hey, where'd you get out of? Okay, there we go. You get back where you belong. Here's what I want you to notice. I want you to notice how early concept storyboards can come in your product development. This is where the magic is. This is where you save money and time. So you've heard of Pixar, right? We all love Pixar and there's these great movies, but those movies start with a lot of iterative storyboarding, and we're really taking a page out of Pixar. They develop, for some of their shorts, this is where it starts. And they don't just sketch it like this. They test it with the other writers. They work the story for a long time in this rough form until it works. And then they go to animation and production, which is very expensive. So concept storyboards are very similar for product development. They have a few differences. Concept storyboards, for instance, have a core loop or a habit loop, where a movie is linear. And if you have any kind of high retention product, you're going to have a loop in the middle of it, or loops within loops. But these concept storyboards are similar to Pixar. You do them very early, and you test the most important thing. You test your value prop. You test, is this what customers want? Who cares if the UX is nice if it's not the features they want? This is how you test this. So how can teams use this? We all know that bringing products to life is a team sport, right? And the work I do is almost always with cross-functional teams. All these tools are meant for cross-functional teams. So the first one is internal collaboration. This design artifact, the end-to-end storyboard, shows everyone on the team, the engineers, the product managers, the executives, the UX people, all the people involved, the marketing people. It can show you, here's what we're thinking of building. Not just day one, not just onboarding, not just screens, but how the whole thing evolves over time, the key beats. So for internal collaboration, it lets you collaborate earlier and much more effectively. And it lets you catch problems much earlier. And it lets you say, hey, let's all make sure we're talking about the same thing. How many people here have ever gotten to a point in a product and you came to a meeting and you found out different people on the team had a different set of assumptions about what you were building? Anybody, right? This will help you catch that early in a way nothing else I've ever seen works. Second thing is, this is genius for UX and concept testing. The main way we use storyboards with our clients is by developing end-to-end storyboards, whether you haven't shipped your product or you've already shipped it and you're fixing it. Developing storyboards of the key beats around the time frame that we want to test, we'll talk about that in a minute, and then running play tests with carefully selected people that are the right people to test with. The amount of time and money that have been saved there, it's just like magic. I strongly encourage any of you who have a leadership role in product to learn how to do this. You will make your execs very happy when they see what happens to your product organization. And then the third one is stakeholders. How many of you ever had to persuade or convince a stakeholder or something in a meeting, right? This is part of our job as product people. These storyboards are incredible, not necessarily the whole end-to-end thing, but moments of them, along with short clips from the customer play tests and interviews you did. I have seen multiple teams get funded, get VC money, get internal approval, get something greenlit, and convince a candidate that what they were doing was cool even before they built it. So there's a lot of uses that these storyboards can really afford you. So a lot of problems come when you silo onboarding from your core loop or your habit loop and other experiences, right? How do we deal with all of it together? Because the customer deals with all of it together. They have a ongoing experience. Well, storyboards can help, and it depends what you want to test. Sometimes you really want to test a 7-day free trial. Is it going to work when we put up the payroll? Is the functionality compelling? Yes, you can test that. What about a month in the life? I've had numerous clients that said, God, we've got this retention drop off in a month and we can't figure out why. Can you test that with storyboards? Yes. What about a 2-month drop off? That was my situation with Netflix. I have a video about that on the channel. They could not figure out this 2-month drop off with a lot of instrumentation and data. They just couldn't figure it out. We had to go qual. So we did the storyboards and we figured it out and we solved their problem. So I keep saying storyboards, story beats. Let me give you a little background real quick. We go deeper in this in our programs, but we're all familiar with the 3-act structure, right? From plays and background. Every story has a structure. One of the structures is 3 acts. There's 5 acts, but the story has an arc and a resolution. Okay, that's part of what makes it a story. And stories have shapes. When you think about the emotions going up and down, these are shapes from different famous movies. And those shapes are driven by what we call story beats. And these are key points of action. If you've done customer journey mapping, you may have done something similar. We don't map out every single screen. That's UX flow. That's not what story beats are. Story beats are the important moments where the user is experiencing the value of your product and things that you want to test. So Lord of the Rings, here's the shape of Lord of the Rings. It's basically a hero's journey. Things get worse and then they get better, and at the end, you're better off than you were at the beginning. How about Jaws? It goes down, a lot happens, and it's kind of the same as it was at the beginning. Dumb and Dumber, nobody changes, no growth, just a lot of laughs, right? And then there's Aladdin, where things get better and better. Stories have a shape. Your product, as a customer uses it, they're creating a story in their head about how the product's helping them do their job, making them more accomplished or connected or knowledgeable. The story in your customer's head is the important story here, not the external story with men in tights and dragons, but the story in your customer's head. And that story has a shape depending on your product design. And you can map this with storyboards. So there's a concept in game thinking. You can learn about this at that video series, if you don't know already, of a mastery path and a habit loop. And we're familiar with some of this from customer journey mapping, but that doesn't include mastery and progression in a concrete way. And this model does. So that story structure is discovery, onboarding, your habit loop, the thing people do again and again, and mastery, which is where people get when they've mastered your system. And in the middle of that is a compelling loop. That's the recipe for a high retention product or game. This gives you story structure that you can hang your beats on. And those story beats capture key activities. What might those look like in a product versus, say, a story like Aladdin? Well, there's three main things you're going to want to visualize. There's conversations, which might happen in your product or, more interestingly, around your product. You're not just showing your product, you're showing your customer in their environment experiencing your product over time, which includes talking to someone about your product, right? That's very important because from your customer's point of view, it's part of their experience. So there's conversations, there's messages that might be messages between people, but messages from your product to the user, notifications, other kinds of messages. And then there's activities, what happens in your product. So you can map conversations in different ways. You can map messages in different ways. These are just sketches that we got in the way I'm going to show you. And you can map activities in these super rough ways. This actually was a kid's Minecraft tournament in a Buffalo Wild Wings with the parents chatting to the side. And they completely understood that that's what this was in the storyboard. It's that rough. So what's happened recently that's changed the game for all of us? GenAI. That's why we're here. All of these different tools. Big thing that stopped people from doing storyboards is they can't draw. And they don't know how to hire someone to draw, or they don't have the budget. Guess what? Now you can prompt. So I'm going to show you a very practical set of steps you can use right away, and I've got a download, so you don't have to remember or write this down. It's all in the download. And I'd love for you to start trying this out. And then I want to hear about what you've been doing already. So it starts by choosing your tool. There's a lot of tools. I just showed you a bunch. If you don't know where to start, go to bing.com/create. That's what we use. It's DALL-E. I think bing.com create is 3.5 DALL-E. Is that right, Scott? I don't think it's the latest version, but the latest version in some ways isn't as good as the earlier version. These tools are always changing out from under you. The prompts that work today work differently tomorrow. Just deal with it and just experiment. So if you go to bing.com create, you can start trying out all the things that I'm going to show you. Here's the prompt that generated the simple black and white line drawing. The 25-year-old woman with a short hair wearing a beanie. There's a drawing. We got that from Bing. Step 2, decide on your art style. Now, if you're doing storyboards, it's actually hard to get the tools to be low fidelity. They tend toward high fidelity unless you explicitly tell them not to. There's a tip. Here's 3 different art styles and the prompts that generated them. All of this is in your download, okay? And you can just grab the text. But sometimes, like when I work with clients, I'll show them different art styles. Sometimes they want a different art style. We just play around with the prompts till we get that art style, and then we use it consistently. Choose an art style. I'll note that the sketchier the art style, the easier it is for somebody to imagine themselves into that character. Has anyone here read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud? This is the whole point of that book, which is the lower fidelity, the easier the customer or the reader can imagine themselves as that protagonist. So really think about embracing, like stick figures are fine, okay? You could use little stick figures and it would be fine. It's showing them doing things over time that's interesting. Step 3, define your storyboard protagonist. So protagonist is from storytelling. It's the hero of the story, the main character. There might be other characters in your storyboard, but there's usually one main character, the user. And people sometimes say, well, our customers are between 18 and 40 and men and women. How do I choose one? Just choose one. Just pick one because you want it to be consistent or reasonably consistent in your storyboard. And again, the lower fidelity, the less it matters how old or what gender they are. A stick figure has a lot of utility there. But you want to define your protagonists. These are 3 protagonists from 3 recent client projects. That's the third. Step 4, you want to describe the setting that they're in and the device they're using to access whatever it is you're storyboarding. It's usually a cell phone or a laptop or a game console, the device. But some of your storyboards might involve not using a digital device. But let me just do a quick poll. Let's say you guys were going to storyboard something you're working on right now. For how many of you would it be mostly a cell phone? How many of you would be mostly a laptop? How many of you would be a web app that can run on multiple devices? Right. So that's what you do. If you run on multiple devices, you actually include that in your storyboard. Here, I've set this person. I had created. This is our protagonist here, this lady. And here in Discovery, she's at the kitchen table looking at something on her cell phone. And then during onboarding, she went to her bedroom, and because it turns out for that app, that was where she needed to be, and she's on her cell phone. For her habit loop, she's in bed at night doing stuff on her cell phone. Do any of you ever do stuff on your cell phone at night in bed? Be honest, right? And for this particular app, that was exactly the moment. And why did we put her in bed on her cell phone? Because we did research to find out when people did certain things in their day, and that's what they did. So we put that into the storyboard. All of this came out of research. And for mastery, she's back in her bedroom and she's heading toward the bathroom. And so there's our 4 settings. This was an app on a phone, but we do this with laptops as well. So that was number 4. Step 5. Start by just telling your story in words. And these are your story beats. Now, how to build good story beats is another conversation. There's a lot of tips in the downloads, and I'll tell you some other ways you can learn how to do that. It's a game changer. But basically, you want to start with a narrative, not with graphics. So you write, what happens. Here's an example. At a high level, these things happen. This is the thing. This is actually real from a client of what they wanted to test. You can test a whole 60 or 90-day journey. You can also just test a new feature. Like in this case, there was a new feature they wanted to test, so they spun up some storyboards. Step 6, once you've got your beats defined, you can add simple illustrations and graphics, and you can go back to Bing.com Create and just play around with it till you get the pictures that look like this. And you can see here the graphics and the prompts that generated those graphics. Step 7. Share. Share with your team. Say, this is what I think we're building. What do you think? Share with your customers. Run play tests. Run them through it. See if it makes sense. See if, what they think about the value. See what they like the best about what you showed them. See what was confusing or annoying or concerning. Raise privacy or data issues early. All of that you can learn from storyboards. And share with your stakeholders when you want to communicate to them what you're doing and how it's going to go, and maybe get their feedback. So a few more hot tips to keep in mind as you go off on your storyboarding journey. You can change the framing. When you're building storyboards, there's shots. And so if any of you are familiar with the language of film at all, this is a full body shot. You can do a torso shot. You can do an over-the-shoulder shot so you don't see their face. You can indicate where you want the camera, essentially, and then you can get different kinds of graphics. You could do a long shot where you see someone in front of a house taking care of a small child in a wagon, You can do different things. Here's another tip. Once you've built storyboards using Bing.com Create or other tools, put them into Canva or Google Slides and decorate it with other graphic elements, because don't try and make graphic elements. And in general, don't try and make yourself, your UX designs with Bing. You can try, but they'll just look cheesy. We usually do those separately. But you can make people in a situation doing something like what you see here, and it can be very evocative. And then you can have thought bubbles, you can have speech bubbles, you can show what's on their cell phone. So you're going to want to pull those storyboards into another tool and use them for your testing and for showing to your team and stakeholders. I like Google Slides. Use whatever's easy for you. Want more tips? Gotcha. Go to gamethinking.io/lean product. You can sign up for this free, very extensive cheat sheet. And you can also get some other goodies there. But I think you'll really enjoy the cheat sheet, and it'll help you remember all these prompts. You can just grab the text off it and pop it into Bing. So now, if you're leaning into this and you dig it and you want more, a few times a year we run a 5-day innovation bootcamp where we teach you how to do this hands-on and actually help you to generate your storyboards with an in-house tool. And it's coming up at the end of February. There's live small group, 5 days of live small group coaching meetings with your choice of time. There's a detailed step-by-step playbook you fill out that helps you with things like the story beats and all of that stuff that I told you about. There's a bunch of instructional videos, so you go way beyond our live time together. You get access to our in-house AI-powered toolkit, which is not yet public, but we may need an NDA, but I think we should be okay by then. But everyone in the bootcamp gets access to it, and we have created a toolkit to let you do this easier hands-on and not have to just go right to Bing. So if that's interesting to you and you want to check it out, you can go to gamethinking.io bootcamp. And because you guys came out tonight, and seriously, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, how good it is to see your faces, we'd like to give you a coupon for $200 off. So feel free. It runs, that's good for a week and a day through the February 21st. If this is helpful for you, we welcome you. I'm sure we'll run it at the end of the year as well. So if the timing's not right, no problem. We have lots of free resources for you to learn from and get started on your own. So this is the URL, and that coupon is also at the Lean Product URL, so you can pick it up there. One URL to rule them all. All right, so thank you so much. I am so excited to hear your questions and also hear how what I just showed you intersects with what you've already learned about storyboarding in your career.
All right. Thanks a lot, Amy Jo. Great talk. Appreciate it. So the way we do Q&A is you have to have a mic in your hands. Just raise your hand and we have mic runners. Thanks, George. That way the people on Zoom can hear and it'll be captured on the video as well. So if you have a question, raise your hand. If you're on Zoom, get it in chat. Here, Brian. Thanks.
I'm thrilled I came in under a half hour. Who likes short talk?
Hi, Amy. I'm Grace. Just wondering, many companies are saying that GenAI in their company is being the privacy issues, right? Like Apple, they don't want anyone using ChatGPT. What are your thoughts on alternatives for that?
Well, part of why we developed our tool was to deal with those issues with our larger clients. So I'd say if that's how your company feels, figure out a way. Like, I'm not just saying go use ChatGPT. If these things don't work, you can try it on your own time, on your own network. You can also go through us, and there's nothing we do that gives any data to the public models. We've got our own sandbox, and we're using it, but we're not giving them back any data. And we do have a model, but we're building our own internal model. So it's sandboxed and private because we have clients who have privacy issues. So I think I'm leaning into it because we have to live with it and just figuring out how to get work done within those constraints. So if that's interesting to you, feel free to talk to us about that. But, you can also do stuff on your own time at home.
Thank you.
Which is what a lot of people do. They play around at home, so it's not on the company network.
Hi, Amy Jo. I love our customers being on the hero's journey. Awesome. I'm curious about your experience with consistent characters, because that is the challenge that I face when dealing with
It's very hard. So it's not yet possible to get truly consistent characters. You can't even get the same image if you use the same prompt twice. You'll get a different image. And it's the nature of LLMs. So what we do right now is tricks and hacks. And I'm happy to share my tricks and hacks. One, you get the more detailed your description, the more consistent the character. Short brown hair cut in a bob will get you more consistency than a woman, right? So you get really detailed. And part of what we do is we have you design a protagonist in a fair amount of detail, and then we just take that off your plate and just have you design the other beats and the settings, and we just, under the sheets, always use the protagonist prompt in all the other prompts. And that's the best we've found. The other thing is if you shoot from behind, differences aren't as noticeable. So you can do an over-the-shoulder shot, and then it seems more consistent. So those are some of the hacks we've learned. But it's changing all the time. And you're right, that is the problem.
Yeah. Got the woman.
Yeah, thank you. I super love this. I personally am a filmmaker and I have a comic book series out, so you're just speaking my language.
Totally, yeah.
I'd say it's also hard to get humans to draw the consistent characters in the sequential art, or actors to act the same way. So it's I don't know if it's any worse. But my question is, and I'm just sort of floored that I hadn't thought about this myself. I'm kind of kicking myself, but I think it's super brilliant, because I think in terms of that value, I mean, I think that, getting that kind of art and description, you would pay, Deloitte Digital or Publicis Sapient or big consultancies a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
To deliver this. So I think it's I think it's brilliant. But my question is, if I'm going to, kind of bring this to my team, the hard part, I think, is trying to get across the story beats and
yes,
what actually matters, right? So do you have any thoughts about how to instruct them and get them on board when they may not feel creative or they may not feel insightful in that way?
Well, the story beats, you don't need to be feeling creative. You just really need to talk through the story. So I have a few tips, and then I can also say you've nailed one of the hardest things, although as a filmmaker, you're going to have an edge. But for your team, so the first thing is always start by writing a narrative. Always, always, always. Don't go to images, because you can see the flow of it much easier with a narrative. A lot of times what I do with a team is very practical. Okay, so I will have them just do their best. Like I have a module, like a learning module to teach you about it. But I just have them do their best, and they write a bunch of beats, and they usually do way too many, right? They usually are doing something more like a UX flow with every screen, because they're used to it. So then we just start removing things. And we say, do we really need to show them the login screen, right? Versus a slide that says, you download the app, log in, and then you see X, and you show them X. So maybe we don't need to show them the login screen. But for instance, if I'm working with a fintech app, we absolutely need to show them the screen where we ask them to connect their bank account. Why? Because we want to test it and see if they have hesitation. So I find that if you let people do more than enough and then start taking them out, that can make people feel a sense of ownership and understanding. And then if you also, you can just like, another trick is like draw a timeline, just like, get out Google Slides or a whiteboard or whatever, Miro or whatever you like, and draw a timeline and put like these 4 phases, super helpful. A big part of why onboarding, habit building, mastery, and discovery too, but sometimes you can leave out discovery. It depends what you're testing. Is that onboarding, habit building, mastery, draw a line, give yourself 3 to 5 beats, maybe 6 most for onboarding. And the last one should be some sort of confirmation, like, okay, you're done, or you've done important things, and the first one's going to be intro. What happens in between? And say you only have 3 to 5 beats. What are the big beats? Like, just say it in English. What do your customers do? They do this, they do that. And you want to get people to describe it at the value level versus the UX level. Because The hardest thing is getting people that have done a ton of UX mapping to stop doing that and pull back and think about the value prop of the feature set, not the UX. So those are some tips. Great question.
All right, we got one from Zoom here from Stephen or Stefan Limico. Can you share an example of how storyboards will be used for a product that is used solely in the office, not in a variety of physical environments?
Solely in the office?
Yeah.
You mean like a physical office? No remote people? What? Sure. So you would...
Sounds like it's just one office environment versus multiple.
Yeah,
We saw the lady with the phone moving around. So
Yeah, you would just show people in the office. You might show them sitting at a desk. You might show them standing up, talking to someone else, if that's relevant in the office. You might show them around a meeting table. Or you might just show different versions of someone sitting at a desk. And you just do it like that. And then for your screens, because usually you have a picture of someone and then like a screen next to it showing what's on their screen, you might show laptop screen and just have, the picture on a laptop screen versus a mobile screen. But if the Office app also runs on a phone and you want to show it on the phone, you would want to incorporate that. But you can keep people in the same location.
Sure.
Not a problem. It's just, let me just say, the reason to show a person in an environment, not just your screens, is because storyboards aren't about testing your screens and your product. They're about testing how people are going to experience your product in their life. So you want to trigger their life. And so in the customer, the tester's mind, they're going, oh yeah, I can imagine myself like that.
They could provide the context of use that they're going to be.
Right. You want to trigger that. So you want your storyboards to cause the person you're testing to form a story in their head about using it so they could extrapolate, so it feels very real, so they could imagine themselves using it.
Cool. One other from Zoom is roughly how much person time should be budgeted to learn and create a concept storyboard of, say, 12 panels? Just need a ballpark estimate.
Don't have a ballpark. I mean, it depends on the tools, how experienced you are. If you were working with us, we could do that really quickly with our tool. So that's a whole different thing. But I without more context, I would be talking out of my ass if I gave you an estimate, honestly.
Got it. Okay, cool.
So for a lot of the storyboarding, when you do the testing, and in my experience, I always worry about biasing or taking care of bias. But with this simpler style, it seems like a lot of bias would accidentally creep in. Any tips for kind of identifying the...
I don't know. Give me an example. What are you imagining?
So
when you say bias,
yeah,
do you mean by the
influence by the story that you've created being so compelling that it influences the person that you're interviewing, and say, oh, that
You're not creating a compelling story. You're showing what you want to build over time. And if that's compelling, that's a good thing. You're not telling a story about your product and wowing them. That's not what storyboards are. Okay. So I guess I'm a little confused why you think it would be biasing.
Well, in some cases, because you're trying to, like, I work a lot in healthcare products.
Right, as do I, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with nurses and physicians, they like to be pleasers sometimes. I mean, okay, physicians don't like to be pleasers. Sometimes they like to be contrarians. But in many cases, if you tell a story that they think looks good, they'll tell you, oh, that looks great. Oh, I'd love to use that. But then they would actually never use it because there are too many political hurdles in the way.
Right. So that's an example of getting sentiment about their desire to use something and having an upstream issue prevent that desire from being fulfilled. And that's an analytic issue. So if you test people's desire in healthcare for something and the doctors and nurses are like, this service would help me. Mm-hmm. I see the feature set. I see the flow. I see the information available to me. I have to tell you this would help me. That's real. You can get that from the doctors and nurses. And by the way, if you do storyboards right, you can absolutely do storyboards wrong and get false positive, no question. But if you do them right, you will get far fewer false positives than with any other methodology. And you set people up and you tell them, you're not here to tell us what's right. You're here to tell us what runs through your mind. This is not built. We haven't committed to this. You can't hurt our feelings. Look at these rough storyboards. We want to know what runs through your mind as you realize what this thing is. And when you set people up like that, they will be brutal. They will tell you. But the doctors and nurses who like it, but there's an upstream political issue, that's on you to figure out as a developer, right? Like, that's a contextual issue. I have this with a client right now. This client is working on a new kind of service to help you really leverage your HSA account, which is this incredible triple tax advantaged account. How many of you have HSAs? Anybody? Yeah, right? Aren't they awesome? So there's this new service to help you leverage it. But it turns out there's these issues with the way HSAs are distributed that might make the whole thing not work. And we're like hitting it during the project. Guess what? That's part of entrepreneurship. So these storyboards can't tell you about the political stuff necessarily, but what they can do is they can be a forcing function that makes what you want to build very concrete. And not just like a screen, but the experience you want to deliver over time, very concrete. And then it lets you test the desirability of that with your target customers. Doesn't mean you're done, but it lets you test that. Did that help?
Yeah, so you're saying you're just using this to test desirability, period.
Well, you can test a lot of other things, but that's the main thing. Yes, I'm saying it, period, is like, could you use it to test the politics? Probably not, but there's probably other things you could use that would surface the politics. The other thing is, if you do it right and you test the doctors and nurses, the issues around politics would surface during the test. If you do it right, they would actually show up. And there's a debrief period where you can ask them, like, what are the things that might keep you from using this if you had it in your hands? And then you can get it. So you can work that into your testing once you've given them a clear picture of what it is.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
We get a Zoom one in while we're running the mic. How much should we focus on the happy path? I'm warning about the value of storyboarding potential moments of failure.
That's a great question. You should start by creating a backbone of the happy path. Again, I'm dealing with this with a client right now, and there's a lot of failure states that we're concerned about that we mapped out, and we just made ourselves crazy. And we actually hadn't mapped out the happy path. We had all the failure states. So you always want to start with a coherent scenario, one cut through the experience of a happy path that's realistic. Then you can start working in the different failure states and the fall off states and things like that. So you want to build that backbone first.
Me again. Could you talk a little more about the testing, what that looks like, how many people, what sort of scenario, and how you structure it?
So we create scenarios that go from discovery through mastery, structured. We have lots of templates, and a lot of them are available in simple version for free, but we have a lot of templates for that. And you create storyboards and you work out lightweight what your screens are going to look like, just like information on the screens, titles, things like that. You make sure the whole thing looks undone and not too pretty. You try and minimize graphics, because if you ever show people text and graphics on a screen, what are they going to comment on? The graphics. So you try and minimize that if you can, unless it's important for testing. You recruit people that are your exact just right testers, meaning ideally they show solution-seeking behavior. If you just test random people, you're going to get random feedback and you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You want to test this with people that have a real need and that are looking for a solution like this. Maybe they're your current customers, maybe you can recruit them, but solution-seeking behavior is the key. Not what they say, what they do. If you have really good recruiting and you filter them with a screener and say speed interviews, which are 5-minute screening interviews, you can get most of what you need with 7 to 10 people, sometimes 5 to 7, sometimes up to 15, but we're like looking at the 7 to 15 numbers. 1 hour play tests, start with a short warm-up interview, run them through the scenario, do a debrief afterwards with good questions that really get at what they really thought about it, not all the details, but kind of their summary thoughts, and how they think about it socially, who else they would tell about it, if they've seen anything like it, those kind of questions. And again, we have templates for all that, but it's a test with bumpers that are an interview, a warm-up interview, and then a debrief interview. So you suck all the juice out of it. I usually record these in Zoom or Google Meet or directly into Descript, and then we pull them into Descript and get transcripts and summaries. Descript is a video editing tool. Any of you, Otter AI probably has summarization. I use Supernormal. My team uses Read AI. But if you have your AI readers in the room with you during the playtest, hot tip, everything gets easier. You get the summary, you get the transcript, you can go into Descript and use text to grab the best quotes and then put it into presentation for your stakeholders, and you're gold.
Are you reading out what's on the screen, or are you just showing it to them and they
To what?
look at it?
To what?
To the storyboards. So if you have the storyboard and they're looking at the beat.
There's more detail there. You say as little as possible. I don't ever read what's on the screen to them. They can read it to themselves. You want, as a facilitator, you want to have your storyboards do the work, but there's some of the storyboards are like some narrative that might say things like, you decide you want to check this out based on what you've seen. So you go ahead and download it and log in, and then you see the description of what you're supposed to do, and then you start the storyboard again. So there's often sort of like, and then this happened in narrative, and that covers up some of those screens that you're not showing. And there's an art to it, but again, that's like the basics. And in our programs, we just make it easy with templates. But you could try this yourself. I mean, if you know movie language, and here's the other thing. You could show people a storyboard with hardly any beats. Like, you ask somebody, what's the fewest beats to get the idea across? Just narrative and a few pictures. Try that. See if they get it.
Thank you.
It's more over there. Let's get some folks who haven't asked yet.
Hi, Irene. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. It was really very insightful. You mentioned that you could use Storyboard to test desirability. I was wondering if you could use storyboards for testing features of a product.
100%. I'm doing that right now with a client. We started by testing desirability. We actually pivoted our model based on that. Now we're doing round 2, and we're actually testing some progression ideas they have, which is a feature. We're also testing our messaging and our language we're using in notifications and text. And you can 100% use storyboards to test that kind of stuff.
So could you walk me through, maybe by giving an example, you used a 7-day trial. How would you build a storyboard for that 7-day trial feature?
You would start with discovery. You say, where do they find out about it? Is it an ad? Is it a friend? Is it an Instagram reel? Is it, make a reel. Where did they find out about it? That's discovery. You come in, that's context, right? Then onboarding. Then you would map out onboarding. Okay, where you describe the 7-day free trial. So you'd want to include that language in it, right? Which is like what you're signing up for. So you'd add some beats for onboarding, few, right? And then you do something on day 1. Presumably you would have them do some action so they get involved, right? Or engaged. You'd show that. And then you'd show the completion of, you're done for day 1. You're all done now. And then it's like, it's day 2. Okay. What makes them come back? Is it a notification? Do they just think about it? Are they reminded of something in their environment? Why do they come back? You show that. Let me keep going. Show so it's like trigger, activity, feedback. So that any engagement, there's going to be some trigger that pulls you back. There's some activity you do when you're there, or chain of activities. And then there's some feedback that you're done with it, or maybe you did, you achieved something, even a completion screen, that's feedback. So there's something like that, presumably, if you're a good designer. And then you show day 3. And then maybe you fast forward to day 7. right? Maybe you don't show every day, but you show day 1, day 2, day 7. And then it's day 7. What pulls them back? What do they experience? How do they experience the paywall? You put right in front of them, you skip a few days and you show them the paywall, and then you show them that and you find out what runs through their mind when they see it. So you set up all the context of what they're going to get during the trial, not every screen, but the value they're going to get, right? And you make it vivid with a scenario that's realistic. Like, what time of day are they likely to be logging in? Are they on a cell phone or a computer, right? And then you show them that paywall. And you can, as you run tests, if you find out people react a certain way, you can change it.
Thank you very much.
Did that make sense? Good. Okay.
Hey, Amy, thanks a lot for this. So as an entrepreneur, when you're actually testing an idea, right? Testing desirability, after speaking to a few consumers, you kind of create a hypothesis of the entire problem that you're trying to solve, right? And using that, you can create a storyboard for sure. But when you're actually showing it to multiple consumers, over time, it might need re-editing and incorporating those changes, right? So
Correct.
How often do you think that storyboard should incorporate those comments and changes?
It just depends on your cadence. Like, when I'm working with a client and we're really powering it out, we might be doing it twice a week. It really just depends on the cadence and what you're testing, and how complex things are. You don't want to do it necessarily after one play test. Like, you want to make changes based on patterns, not on a single data point. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But I'll give you an example. I'm working with a client right now. We're going to run 6 play tests this week, and then we've got 6 scheduled for next week. And we're going to run the 6 play tests, listen, analyze, and then we're going to make a bunch of changes before we run the next set of play tests, and probably similar. So it just depends on what stage you're out of development and what cadence you're doing. If you're, doing something heavier weight or more people are involved, it may be every few weeks, right? Rather than multiple times a week.
Got it. I think so. Identifying patterns is the key point.
Pardon?
Identifying patterns is the key thing that you should look for, right?
Yeah. You want to identify patterns, not just overreact when one customer says one thing.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Hi, Amy. This was a great presentation. It actually jogged a lot of my memories. I used to do the storyboarding when I was at USC for games projects, and it used to work great. And then I used it even in a VR company that I worked for. This worked for me a lot in startups, but I did not have much luck introducing storyboards in a large corporate. And it was entering consumer wellness too. So how I tried bringing in storyboard concepts for new product introductions for hardware to get buy-in from leadership. Do you have any examples with how you used it to get buy-in from leadership?
The most important thing I found about working for large companies, which is not going to be a surprise to a lot of you, is you have to find a high-level sponsor. You have to find someone who's an executive level who can support you, or you're not going to have a chance. So every successful engagement I've ever done at a big company that involves storyboards, I've done it for Shiseido, I've done it for GM, I've done it for Procter & Gamble, really big companies. Disney already does storyboards. That one was easy. But always there was an executive, often a level or two above the hiring manager who hired me, who was excited about doing something new, who was frustrated with the slow movingness of their existing research org, who wanted to try something new. And that is the single best thing, is find an internal champion. And often it might not be who you think. And then appeal to their desire to not just get the same results by doing it the same way, but by trying something new. And then was there someone else over there? Yes, this lady. Okay, gentlemen, and then this lady.
What reeled me in was the Gen AI piece of it, and not being that good at drawing, trusting myself. But I presume you used to do this before Gen AI was a thing. And so would you say it's worth the effort learning like illustration, the basics of illustration, to be able to develop storyboards that are maybe that much more accurate to your vision, where you don't have this intermediate tool in between potentially misinterpreting?
I actually think stick figures are better. Having done it so much, I think you can use stick figure libraries from Canva. If you want to learn to sketch because it brings you joy, learn to sketch. That's really what I think. My partner is an incredible artist, and he's done a lot of our hand storyboards before. I don't do my own storyboards. I would hire people before these tools. I'm very good at speccing, so I would have a good spec, but I would hire them on Upwork or whatever. But what I found is that the Gen AI tools are good enough if you can get them to look sketchy. And if you don't want to use those, there are libraries of people and objects in Canva that really are all you need. So, and the reason goes back to that Scott McCloud point, which is the simpler it looks, the easier it is for many different people of different ages and races, et cetera, to read themselves into it.
Good idea.
Yeah, hi, Amy. So I'm a B2B product manager.
Oh, can she go? She's been waiting for a while. And then this gentleman. Okay.
Hi, Amy. I'm a B2B product manager and work on internal systems, right? So when doing any new product or application for your internal stakeholders, you have multiple stakeholders and it's also B2B. How do you go about the storyboarding for such scenarios? Do you create for each persona, or any suggestion?
What do you mean by persona in this situation?
It could be anyone who's touching or using an application, and their type of people, they would use it for a particular use case.
Yeah, you could probably do mini storyboards for the different use cases. I'm a big fan of job stories versus personas, or attaching job stories to your personas, which are action-oriented versus demographic and psychographic-oriented. So that's a bridge that helps you. But in terms of storyboards for different personas, the most important thing is to start with your happy path that's going to work largely for everybody. It's really easy to get into all the details of this persona wants this and this persona wants that. Is it actually achievable by your engineering team? All of that different stuff, So a lot of times I've worked with teams where we do a bunch of that, segmentation and personas and a bunch of design. And if you have a very mature product and a big team and a well-oiled machine, you may be able to do that. But sometimes it really just bogs you down. So there's a different question to ask, which is, what's the feature set that most of these personas can use? And then make a path that works for most people, and then clone it and make a tweak to it for one use case and a tweak to it for another use case. So you sort of have your backbone storyboard, and you don't have to reinvent the storyboard for every use case. It's good if you sort of have a, like the parent one, and then does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just very practical. Like I'm thinking about, we do it in Google Slides, right? So we would, if I had a client like that, I would make a pretty detailed template with like, fill in this here, fill in this there. And then we would use that template and tweak it for each of the different scenarios and then set about running them.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Over here.
Hi. Thank you very much for sharing. Can I put storyboards in my pitch deck? Is it a common practice? At least
it's more common in gaming probably than in tech. It depends who you're pitching. Sometimes fancy images can get things funded when they have nothing to do with the product or the end result, but they're pretty, and you just have to know who you're pitching. And I'm not above putting in high-res images to get money, right? But sometimes that's the right thing. Sometimes storyboards work. I have seen them backfire. I have done presentations to media executives at like Viacom, and they did not like storyboards because they'd said, well, I don't want the product to look like this. And we're like, it's not the product. So there's context, and they just really reacted negatively. But if I was having a meeting with, someone who was a builder, someone who, was going to fund me but had built stuff, or someone who was a designer, it's a whole different can of worms. So I think a huge amount of it is knowing who you're pitching. Because when we were raising money for our startup years ago, we pitched the exact same deck to probably 30, 35, and we got told it was just awful and we should do this and that by all these people. And then we went to this one meeting and they're just like, oh my God, take our money. It's like, depends who you're pitching.
Thank you.
Right? You guys probably know what I'm talking about, those of you who've raised money. All right. Thank you for all your questions, by the way. Love it. Love it. Oh, wow. It's on stage.
I wanted to go back to one point in the storyboards, which I'd love to get your thoughts on, which is kind of time elapsing, right? So even in the 7-day example, when you're presenting the story to the research participant, how reliable do you find their sort of anticipation of how they'll behave at a later point in time? I always find that
I'm never asking them to imagine how they'll behave. You're showing them things for them to react to. It's very different.
So yeah, can you just elaborate on, like, if I'm going to present that time elapse, what's a good way to kind of elicit that exact kind of...
You just intersperse simple screens that say 7 days later, you get a notice that blah, blah, blah. And then they just go ahead. So the best practice there is to just have these narrative slides for time passing that look different than the other slides and that are consistent, and use them in a consistent way, and people fall right in. They can really do that. So I think it's the idea to keep a few narrative slides in with the more storyboarding slides. They give the whole thing like a cadence, and people then get used to it. So then you can do your onboarding, and it's day one, and you're sort of in that moment, right? And then you're done. The next morning, you get a notification, like everyone's fine with that. You just put that in narrative. 3 days later, you log back in, put that in narrative. Was there any more?
Yeah, we can use the SpongeBob a few moments later if you want. Okay. All right, let's take a last question and then we'll break, and I'm sure we can answer some more questions.
Amy, hello. Yeah, insightful on any number of dimensions. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Here's a question. Do you remember? This isn't the question, but to answer. Do you remember the book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain?
Very well.
Okay, that's where I learned how to draw. When I start to get my PMs and my teams, when we do product development, often bring in people from multiple disciplines. We often bring people in from other departments who've never done visual thinking before. The first thing we would have people do to loosen up their right brain was to do something like out of that book, draw upside down picture. So related questions. The first is, how do you warm people up who aren't used to thinking this way? How do you get people to adapt this? And my second question goes to, my goal would ultimately be to have each of the people in that room do their own storyboards and bring them together to see the idea. Is that where you would want the teams to go? Is that how you would train your teams in an ideal world?
Well, you can do whatever you want. I wouldn't get people drawing. I don't think that's actually what you want.
I don't mean drawing, but using the tools to do storyboarding. Think storyboarding, which captures emotion as well as content.
Right. So the way I warm people up is I have these templates, and they're like the prep for the storyboarding. So if you just go into the tool and you start storyboarding, you can just get lost, and you need a checklist or like your prompt cheat sheet, right? But what we do is, and I don't just have people do storyboarding and like random storyboarding and, how might we and all that. We're designing the customer journey. And we're designing a habit loop that has very specific parameters. So, because that's what we do. So for that, the warm-up is usually like a workshop-y session with folks where everybody, or ideally, rather than I'm a big fan of collaboration too, because when everybody goes off and does their own thing, we come back together. It can be great for certain things. It's not a one size fits all. But for this, I like the team to work together in pairs. And I give them a template to fill out where I ask them questions that prepare them to use the tool that, like if we're working on figuring out who to target and who to recruit, I would have them differentiate between their TAM, their larger target market, and a tiny, high need, early niche. And, get specific. I would have them think through their, who they would be recruiting, what the parameters are. I'd have them brainstorm about solution-seeking behavior. I mentioned that earlier. And I have like a really pretty, colorful template, and they can fill it out. And so we would alternate between talking and then filling out the template. And they would do it as a team, so they're discussing it in real time, right? And then once we did that, we would go to the tools and use the thinking we had done and plug it into the tools. And then when we get stuff back from the tools, if we don't like it, we just say, oh, well, change this. And we start prompt engineering, right? And when we prompt engineer in a group, people are sharing their stuff with each other. Oh, I tried this and it worked really well. And you tried this thing. And then at the end, we collect the best prompts and we put them in a shared doc so everybody can use them. So that's the process I would use. And the thing is, someone earlier, I think it was you, someone said the story beats are the really hard part. That's 100% true. It's an art. You get better at it. It's like a muscle. You get better at it when you do it. But that's what I would try and get people to wrap their minds around, is just the bones of the whole thing, the story beats. And I use this templatized way of kind of forcing them to think on that level. And like, let's just look at the habit loop. Let's just zoom in on day 21. What's the trigger? What's the core beats? What is, if in the happy path, what's happening on day 21 or day 30? And get them to start actually writing those beats, and then we can illustrate the beats. So I think just getting people to start to narrate story beats is really hard. And if you can warm people up so that just comes out of them, you are winning.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot, Amy Jo. Appreciate it. Thanks for great talk and Q&A. Thanks for the cheat sheet.